What happens when Hollywood's most controversial redemption arc collides with late-night television's sharpest tongue? Viewers got their answer when Mark Wahlberg sat down with Stephen Colbert for what was meant to be a routine promotional appearance, but spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night TV history. Within minutes of the cameras rolling, what began as the usual celebrity banter devolved into a tense verbal standoff. The studio audience gasped, production assistants scrambled, and by the time it was over, one A-list actor had stormed off set, leaving behind accusations, raw truths, and a host who had completely lost control of his own show. The tension was palpable the moment Wahlberg took his seat. His signature Boston swagger clashed almost immediately with Colbert's polished, calculated smugness. Known for his talent at disarming guests with seemingly innocuous questions laced with barbed wit, Colbert was unusually pointed, almost hostile from the jump. Mark Wahlberg, everybody, Colbert announced with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man who somehow convinced Hollywood that beating up random Asian men as a teenager qualifies you for leading man status. The studio fell into a stunned silence. This wasn't late-night teasing. This was a direct hit. Wahlberg's jaw tensed. His hands gripped the armrests. The actor leaned forward, his voice taking on the familiar edge from The Departed. "Excuse me?" he said, his Boston accent thickening, always a sign that his fuse was burning. "What did you just say to me?" Colbert, seemingly energized by Wahlberg's reaction, didn't back down. If anything, he pressed harder. "Oh, come on, Mark, we're all friends here," he said with faux warmth. "Most actors go to drama school or wait tables. You took the more direct route to stardom." Colbert's smirk widened, clearly proud of the jab. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't comedy. It was something else entirely. Offstage, Wahlberg's publicist frantically motioned to cut the segment. But it was too late. "Listen here, Stephen," Wahlberg said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "I came here to talk about my movie. Not to get lectured by some comedy writer who thinks he's better than everyone because he went to fancy schools and never had to fight for anything." The air thickened with tension. Colbert's carefully curated persona began to crack. The twinkle in his eye faded. His fingers tapped his desk faster. His voice, when it came, was cold. "That's rich," he snapped. "Coming from a guy who made millions playing tough guys after spending his youth terrorizing innocent people. Tell me, Mark, when you're method acting, do you draw on those memories?" The question cut like a scalpel. Precise, brutal. Wahlberg's face flushed. For a brief moment, it looked like he might lunge across the desk. The camera crew, sensing TV gold, zoomed in to catch every flicker of fury on his face. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about," Wahlberg shot back, his voice rising despite an obvious effort to stay composed. "You sit here every night judging people you've never met, cracking jokes about situations you've never lived. You have no idea what it's like to grow up where I did, make the mistakes I made, and then spend decades trying to make up for them." Colbert wasn't moved. In fact, Wahlberg's emotional honesty only seemed to harden his stance. He leaned back, satisfied like a predator admiring his kill. "Oh, I get it," he said, voice heavy with mock compassion. "We're supposed to feel sorry for you. The poor little movie star who had such a hard childhood that he thought hate crimes were a valid form of self-expression?" The words hit like a gut punch. "That's quite the victim narrative you've built for yourself, Mark." The moment the word hate crimes left Colbert's mouth, the last thread of civility snapped. Wahlberg shot to his feet so fast his chair skidded backward and slammed into the set backdrop with a jarring crack that echoed through the silent studio. His fists clenched at his sides, his frame rigid with fury. Every muscle looked primed for confrontation. "That's enough," he growled, his voice booming across the stage. "You want to talk about hate? Let's talk about the hate you're spewing right now, you self-righteous. Gentlemen, please," came a strained voice off camera. A producer trying in vain to salvage control. Neither man listened. The show was no longer a performance. It was raw, real, dangerous. Gone was the grinning late-night comic. The man now seated behind the desk wasn't playing a character. He was seething with moral indignation, wielding his platform like a weapon, and Wahlberg, clearly no longer just an actor promoting a film, looked like a man pushed to the edge. The audience sat frozen. This wasn't television. This was something primal, something that felt too real to be staged. The silence following Wahlberg's eruption stretched uncomfortably. The cameras kept rolling. No one dared cut to commercial. Not yet. Colbert, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far, tried to claw back some semblance of control with a brittle, performative laugh. "Well, Mark," he said, voice shaking slightly beneath the forced levity, "it seems we've touched a nerve." "Touched a nerve?" Wahlberg echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. He stepped closer to the desk, eyes blazing. "You think this is funny? You think my life, my mistakes, the work I've done to come back from all that's just material for your monologue?" His hands trembled, whether from rage or adrenaline, no one could tell. Behind the cameras, crew whispered frantically into headsets, debating whether to intervene or let the meltdown play out. But Colbert didn't back down. If anything, he doubled down. "Look, Mark," he said, eyes narrowing, "if you can't handle criticism about your past, maybe you shouldn't have built your entire career playing the tough guy. Maybe you should have stayed in Boston doing whatever it is you did before. Hollywood decided to give you a redemption arc." The blow landed. Wahlberg's face shifted. Shock, hurt, then something colder, harder. When he spoke again, it was calm, controlled, and somehow far more chilling than anything that had come before. "You want to talk about rehabilitation?" he said, voice low. "Let's talk about yours, Stephen." He leaned in. No longer shouting, just cutting. "You've spent your whole career hiding behind jokes and characters because you're too much of a coward to say what you really think. You pretend you're brave, but all you've done is sit behind a desk in a studio, looking down at everyone else like you're above it all. At least I own my past. At least I've tried to fix the damage I caused. What have you done except sit in your ivory tower and judge?" Colbert flinched. For the first time, the seasoned host looked visibly rattled. His practiced cool was cracking piece by piece in front of a live audience and millions of viewers at home. "Coward," he spat, rising to meet Wahlberg's gaze. "I've spent my career speaking truth to power, calling out corrupt politicians, greedy corporations, and yes, celebrities who think they're untouchable because they've made a few decent movies. Accountability. That's what this is." Wahlberg laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "You call this accountability? This isn't journalism. It's a public execution dressed up as entertainment. You ambushed me, brought me on under false pretenses just to throw the worst moments of my life in my face. That's not brave. That's cruel." The audience was dead silent now. No applause, no gasps. Just stunned, breathless silence. A few people had pulled out their phones, recording, watching, immortalizing what was quickly becoming a cultural flashpoint. And both men knew there was no going back. What followed was destined to become the most viral moment in late-night television history. The atmosphere in the studio was suffocating, thick, with tension so sharp it felt like a held breath stretched to its breaking point. Colbert stood from behind his desk, something he almost never did during interviews. The gesture, clearly meant to assert dominance, had the opposite effect. It intensified the confrontation, turning a verbal exchange into something that felt almost physical. "Cruelty?" he spat. "You want to talk about cruelty, Mark? Cruelty is what you did to those innocent people when you were a teenager. Cruelty is building a career on charm and redemption without ever fully acknowledging the trauma you caused." Wahlberg's voice cracked as he fired back. "I have acknowledged it," he said, emotion tightening his throat. "I've talked about it in interviews. I've donated. I've tried to do better every single day since then." His hands trembled slightly. "But people like you won't ever let it go because you need me to be the villain. It makes you feel better about yourself." The psychological war had escalated. What began as a tense exchange had unraveled into something far more personal. Two men, ripping at the foundations of each other's identity, and then Colbert delivered the line that crossed the point of no return. "Maybe that's because you are the villain, Mark. Maybe some things are unforgivable, no matter how many movies you make or checks you write." Silence. Even the camera operators paused, hands frozen on their rigs, as the weight of those words settled over the room. Wahlberg stood completely still, eyes locked on Colbert. His expression shifted. Shock, disbelief, then something deeper. Something wounded. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Unforgivable?" He repeated it, tasting the word. letting it hang in the air like smoke. And then his voice changed, rising, gaining force not just from anger but from genuine pain. "You know what's unforgivable, Stephen?" Wahlberg said, stepping closer to the desk. "Okay, using your platform to destroy people for sport. Tearing down anyone who doesn't fit your perfect, sanitized little worldview, all while pretending to be some kind of moral compass for the rest of us." Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg cut him off with a raised hand. "No, you've said enough. You've shown everyone exactly who you are tonight. Behind the clever jokes and the smug smile, you're just another bully with a microphone." The word bully hit like a slap. Colbert visibly faltered. His eyes narrowed. His facade, so carefully cultivated over years on television, began to crack. "Bully?" he snapped. "I'm the bully? That's rich. Coming from someone who literally assaulted people because of their race." The audience gasped. Loudly. A few members in the front row shifted uneasily, some turning to each other, others glancing toward the exits. It no longer felt like a talk show. It felt like something dangerous unraveling in real time. Wahlberg moved another step forward, his entire frame radiating barely contained fury. "That's it. We're done here." His voice was low but final. But Colbert couldn't stop himself. Or wouldn't? He threw one last dagger. "Running away again, Mark? Just like you ran away from ever taking real responsibility for what you did?" And that was the final straw. Wahlberg's composure disintegrated. "Coward," he roared, the word detonating through the studio like a bomb. The force of his voice made some audience members flinch. "Coward," he repeated, face flushed red, the veins in his neck bulging as 2 decades of bottled-up guilt, frustration, and resentment came crashing to the surface. "You want to see a coward, Stephen? Look in the mirror." Without warning, Wahlberg slammed his fist down onto Colbert's desk with such violence that the host's coffee mug flipped, spilling dark liquid across his cue cards. The thud echoed like a gunshot. Security at the edge of the stage took cautious steps forward, hands twitching at their sides, unsure if they needed to step in. "I was a stupid, ignorant kid," Wahlberg shouted, his accent thick and sharp. "I made terrible mistakes, but I've had the guts to own them. I've tried every damn day to make up for what I did." Then his voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. "What's your excuse for being a piece of trash on national television, right now, as a grown man who should know better?" Colbert, now visibly shaken, finally realized the moment had spiraled beyond his control. He tried to de-escalate. "Mark, please. Let's just—" Wahlberg cut him off with a force that made Colbert recoil. The host, once a towering figure of late-night intellect and satire, now looked small, diminished, and America was watching. "You don't get to let's just anything," Wahlberg snapped, his voice like a whip crack across the dead-silent studio. "You wanted this fight, now you've got it." He took a sharp breath, his chest rising and falling with the force of his fury. "You think you're some kind of moral authority? Better than me?" Wahlberg shook his head with disdain. "Let me tell you something about yourself, Stephen Colbert." He began pacing behind the guest chair like a predator in a cage, his movements taut and aggressive. The tension in the room was unbearable. No one moved. No one even breathed. The cameras kept rolling, capturing a meltdown that would go down as one of the most shocking and unforgettable moments in television history. "You hide behind comedy," Wahlberg continued, his voice rising with each word, "because you're terrified of being real, even for 5 goddamn minutes. You've built your whole career on being fake, on playing characters, on pretending. You never take a stand unless it's safe, because if anyone ever saw the real you, you wouldn't have a career left." He paused, glaring down at the host. "At least when I was a screwed-up kid, I was honest about who I was." The words landed like punches. Colbert's face had gone ghostly pale, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk with white-knuckled desperation. For the first time in perhaps his entire career, he had no comeback. No clever deflection, no ironic distance, just silence. And Wahlberg wasn't done. His voice lowered, sharpened into something colder. "You know what the saddest part is?" he said. "I used to respect you. I thought you were smart. I thought you were funny. But tonight you showed everyone exactly what you are. A bully. A bully who hides behind a desk and a smile, tearing people down because it makes you feel powerful. Colbert finally found his voice, but it was barely a whisper. Mark, I think we should take a commercial break. Wahlberg laughed. It was hollow, humorless. Oh, now you want a commercial break? He said. Where was that concern when you were dragging me through the mud for laughs? He stepped forward, eyes blazing. No, Stephen. We're finishing this. Right here. Right now. Then Wahlberg turned to the audience, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces staring back at him. You want to know the truth about your hero? He asked. He invited me here under false pretenses. His producers told mine this was going to be a light, fun interview about my movie. Instead, he planned this ambush from the start. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were out now, dozens of them, recording every second. They knew they were witnessing the kind of moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered for years. Colbert struggled to rise, his legs unsteady. That's not true, and he stammered. I wouldn't. Oh, don't lie to them, Wahlberg snapped. At least have the guts to admit what you did. You set this up because you thought humiliating me would get you ratings. And then what? Go home feeling good about yourself? Pretend you held me accountable while patting yourself on the back for your virtue? Colbert tried again to seize control, but it was useless. Mark, you're clearly upset. Upset? Wahlberg barked out a bitter laugh. You think this is me being upset? This is me being done. His voice shook now, not from anger but from disappointment. I'm disgusted, Stephen. Disgusted that I ever respected you. Disgusted that you're allowed to treat people like this. And disgusted with myself for trusting you. The studio was so quiet the air conditioning hum sounded deafening. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled in earpieces. No one had planned for this. No one knew how to stop it. This wasn't just a meltdown. It was a career demolition playing out in real time. Wahlberg stepped back to the guest chair, but didn't sit. He reached for his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and turned back toward Colbert. You know what the difference is between us? He asked, his voice eerily calm now. I was 17 when I made my worst mistakes. You're a grown man making yours right now in front of millions, and you still don't have the courage to admit it. He walked toward the exit, but paused just before leaving the stage. Then, turning one last time, he looked at Colbert, who sat frozen in his chair, shattered and silent. Good luck explaining this to your wife and kid, Wahlberg said coldly. Good luck telling them why Daddy decided to humiliate someone on live TV just for fun. The mention of his family landed like a hammer blow. Colbert's face crumpled. His posture collapsed inward. Whatever composure he had left disintegrated. Wahlberg didn't wait for a reply. He turned back toward the audience, now sitting in stunned silence. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice steady, this is what happens when someone confuses being clever with being decent. He gave the cameras one final, piercing look. Learn from it. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of The Late Show, leaving behind a host whose career would never fully recover from the night he picked a fight with the wrong guest. The audience remained frozen, stunned into silence. No applause, no laughter, just a shared awareness that they had witnessed something historic and deeply uncomfortable. Colbert sat slumped in his chair, no longer the master of ceremonies. Just a man who had miscalculated the cost of cruelty. The cameras lingered for a few more seconds, capturing his hollow expression, then cut to an abrupt, unscheduled commercial break, a merciful end to the most brutal 12 minutes in late-night television history.